You're not African? Let's talk facts, not feelings. Today, we're breaking down African American culture and how it's deeply rooted in African culture, despite the denial. This isn't opinion. This is critical thinking and historical fact. 1. The identity crisis is by design. Many African Americans proudly say, "I'm not African, I'm just black. We're different from them." But that mindset was engineered. Why? Because the colonizer couldn't defeat Africa physically, so they attacked mentally. Divide the tribes, disconnect the memory, rebrand Africans in America as other, and it worked. The slave trade didn't just move bodies, it moved minds away from identity. 2. Afro is not African American, it's African. Let's get the truth straight. The word Afro, Wasu, short for African. It literally means of African origin. So when people say Afro hairstyle, they're saying African hairstyle, not Black American hairstyle, not 1970s trend. It's ancestral. The Afro is an African crown. For thousands of years, African people wore their natural coils, curls, and crown shapes as a symbol of power, tribe, spiritual connection, status. These hair shapes were encoded with meaning. So the Afro isn't fashion, it's identity. Colonizers tried to erase it. During slavery, African hair was shaved to strip identity. European standards pushed straight hair as normal. The Afro was demonized as wild or unkempt. That's not accidental, that's colonial programming. The Afro came back as resistance. In the 1960s, 70s, Black Americans didn't invent the Afro. They reclaimed their African identity. Wearing it was saying, "I'm not ashamed. I'm not assimilating. I am African. All natural black hairstyles are African. Locks, African. Twists, African. Cornrows, African. Bantu knots, African. Even edge laying is rooted in African sculpting of hair. The I'm not African lie benefits white supremacy. Every time a black person rejects their African roots, a colonizer wins. Why? Because the biggest threat to white supremacy is black unity, not just in skin, but in memory. If you forget who you were, you become who they made you. 4. Africa didn't enslave you. Europe did. Let's be clear. Africa is your origin. Colonizers are your trauma. Rejecting Africa because of what happened during slavery is like blaming your ancestors for being kidnapped. 5. Soul music is not African American. Music, it's African music. Stop calling it Black American music like it started in the US. It continued in the US, but it was born in Africa. When enslaved Africans were brought to America, they were banned from using drums. Colonizers feared their power. So what did our people do? They turned their bodies and voices into drums. That's not American innovation. That's African adaptation. Every soul legend carried African tradition. Aretha's vocal runs, that's African vocal freedom. James Brown's screams, that's spiritual shout. Marvin Gaye's pain, that's griot storytelling. They didn't invent it, they channeled it. 6. Hip-hop was African before it was ever American. Hip-hop didn't start in the Bronx. It resurfaced there. Let's decode it. The core of hip-hop is the griot. Before the term rapper, there was the griot, an African oral historian, poet, and storyteller who delivered rhythm, rhyme, and truth over drumming. Griots had bars. They spoke to the community. They exposed corruption, uplifted the people, and preserved memory. That's rap. That's hip-hop. It didn't start in New York. It evolved there. The beat came from the drum. All hip-hop rhythms come from drums. In African culture, the drum isn't just music. It's communication, ritual, protest, and celebration. Breakbeats, African polyrhythms, sampling, ancestral looping, call and response. African cipher. Hip-hop ciphers are just modern-day African circles. Go to any African village, they form a circle to sing, dance, and speak in rhythm. That's the cipher. That's not hip-hop culture. That's African culture reborn under a new name. Street dance, Lurchos African movement. Breakdancing, that's African footwork and flips. Popping and locking, that's African body isolation rituals. The body was always used as language in African tradition, so even hip-hop dance, African roots. Graffiti, ancient African art. Africans were writing and painting on walls long before spray paint existed. Look at ancient Kemet, Egypt, and West African shrines. Marking walls with meaning is ancestral. Hip-hop just evolved the tools. Hip-hop is not African American music. It is African resistance music that survived colonization, slavery, and silence, and re-emerged in the Bronx. The beat never died. The voice just found a mic. Africa is the source. 7. Colonizers knew you were African. That's why they took you. They didn't randomly grab people. They targeted blacksmiths, priests, herbalists, builders, musicians, warriors, because they knew exactly who you were, even if you forgot. 8. African American culture is African culture, just renamed. You say you're not African, but you live African every day. Let's break it down. Call and response in church. Same rhythm style used in African ceremonies and village gatherings. Drum lines and beats. Straight from African talking drums and warrior signals. Spiritual possession in church. Catching the Holy Ghost. Mirrors ancestral spirit possession during African rituals. Braiding hair in patterns. Ancient African map making and tribal identity system. Funerals with dancing and song. African celebration of life and soul transition. Storytelling with rhythm, hand claps, and lessons. Same griot. Oral historian tradition in African villages. Nicknames, tribe-like family structures, and elders being respected. African family culture. Naming children after events or traits, like faith or royal. Same custom in many African cultures. Even the way we celebrate, grieve, love, and move is pure ancestral memory. You didn't lose Africa, you just renamed it. 9. You eat African food. Every day, you just call it soul food. You say you're not African, but you're literally eating the ancestors' recipes. Let's connect the dots. Okra stew, direct from West Africa, Ghana, Nigeria. Black-eyed peas, eaten during African festivals for prosperity. Collard greens, African leaf vegetables used in spiritual cleansing. Yams, sacred in many African traditions, not to be confused with sweet potatoes. Fufu-style dishes, mashed starchy root vegetables, same technique, different name. Fried catfish, freshwater fish commonly prepared in African riverside villages. Gumbo, from the word Kingombo, Bantu for okra. Even the ritual of Sunday dinner, everybody gathered around, no one eats until the elder says so, is 100% African tradition. So before you say you're just black, ask your plate where it came from. 11. All African American inventions are rooted in African genius. African Americans are descendants of African engineers, builders, and creators. That's why innovation runs in the blood. Traffic light, Garrett Morgan. Africans were already masters of complex road trade systems. Refrigeration trucks, Frederick McKinley Jones. Africans were masters of food preservation techniques long before refrigeration. The banjo and blues, directly rooted in African string instruments and call and response rhythms. Rice cultivation. Africans brought the knowledge of rice farming from Sierra Leone and Senegal. Architecture. African Americans who built plantations, cathedrals, and cities learned from ancestral knowledge of pyramids, mud temples, and stonework. Why? Because African people were already metallurgists, iron, gold, bronze. Builders of cities, Timbuktu, Great Zimbabwe, Benin, inventors of navigation, astrology, and math. When you say African Americans aren't African, you erase the genius bloodline that built both Africa and America. 12. You're not African, you're indigenous. Let's use logic. If you're saying you're not African but indigenous to the land, then define your culture. What food are you eating? What language are you speaking? What spiritual system are you following? What rituals do you perform? Because let's be real, you don't speak any indigenous American language. You don't practice Cherokee or Choctaw spirituality. You don't wear traditional regalia or follow native ceremonies. But what are you doing? African food, greens, okra, black-eyed peas, yam-based dishes. African spirituality, ancestor altars, calling on spirits, energy work. African rhythm, music, dance. Drum patterns, call and response, blues. African names, hairstyles, and storytelling. European religion, Christianity. European language, English. European holidays, Christmas, Easter. You're a mix of African and European traditions, yet denying your African blood. That's not indigenous pride. That's colonial confusion. It's the definition of a lost identity, when you reject your roots but can't define what you are. Final thought, you can't claim indigenous without a culture to back it, and you can't reject Africa while living African every day, from your food to your rhythm, from your soul to your slang. You are African first, whether you accept it or not. Colonization didn't just steal your land, it confused your mind. So now you walk like an African, talk like an African, cook like an African, pray like an African, but swear you're not African. That's not identity. That's amnesia. Reclaim your roots, because being African isn't a claim, it's a blood memory.